trapped in ice. How medieval peasants faced brutal winters. Imagine waking up to a world where the very air burns your lungs with cold, where your breath forms clouds of ice crystals, and where the ground beneath your feet has turned into an unforgiving sheet of frozen earth. This was the reality for millions of medieval peasants who faced some of the harshest winters in human history. Between the 14th and 19th centuries, Europe was gripped by what historians call the Little Ice Age. Temperatures dropped so dramatically that rivers froze solid for months, crops failed repeatedly, and entire communities found themselves fighting not just for comfort, but for their very survival. But how did these resilient people, with none of our modern conveniences, manage to endure winters that could last up to 6 months? How did they heat their homes, feed their families, and maintain hope when the world around them seemed frozen in time? The answer lies in a combination of ingenious survival techniques, community cooperation, and an almost superhuman determination to persevere against impossible odds. Let's step back in time and discover the remarkable ways medieval peasants conquered the cold. Medieval winters were not just cold, they were catastrophically brutal. Historical records describe winters so severe that wine froze in chalices during church services, and people's saliva would freeze before hitting the ground. The Thames River in London regularly froze so thick that entire frost fairs were held on its surface, complete with markets, entertainment, and even ox roasting. For peasants living in simple wooden or stone cottages with no central heating, no electricity, and limited food stores, winter meant entering a months-long battle for survival. The wealthy might retreat to their well-stocked castles with multiple fireplaces, but common folk had to rely on their wits, their community, and centuries of accumulated wisdom passed down through generations. Medieval peasant homes were specifically designed with winter survival in mind, even though they might appear primitive by today's standards. These structures were marvels of practical engineering, built to trap and conserve every precious bit of heat. The typical peasant cottage featured thick walls made of stone, timber, and daub, a mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung that provided excellent insulation. The roofs were often thatched with straw or reed, creating an additional layer of insulation that could be several feet thick. Windows were small and few, often covered with oiled cloth or animal skins rather than glass, which was a luxury few could afford. Inside these homes, families would gather around a central hearth, the beating heart of medieval winter survival. This fire would burn continuously throughout the winter months, fueled by carefully hoarded supplies of wood, peat, or even dried animal dung. Every member of the family slept as close to this fire as possible, often sharing beds with multiple family members, and even bringing their most valuable livestock indoors. The animals served a dual purpose. Their body heat helped warm the living space, and their presence ensured they wouldn't freeze to death, protecting the family's most valuable assets. It wasn't uncommon for peasant families to share their one-room homes with chickens, goats, and even pigs during the coldest months. Perhaps no aspect of medieval winter survival was more critical than food preservation and management. Peasants had to make their autumn harvest last through months when nothing could grow, and failure meant starvation. The preservation techniques medieval peasants developed were sophisticated and varied. Meat was salted, smoked, or dried into jerky-like strips that could last for months. Fish were packed in salt or dried in the autumn sun. Vegetables were pickled in brine, buried in root cellars, or dried and stored in sealed containers. Grains formed the backbone of the winter diet. Peasants would grind their stored wheat, barley, and oats into flour as needed, creating thick porridges, hearty breads, and filling soups that could stretch limited ingredients to feed entire families. These grain-based meals were often supplemented with preserved vegetables, creating nutritious stews that provided the calories needed to maintain body heat. One of the most ingenious preservation techniques was the creation of what we might call winter gardens. Root vegetables like turnips, carrots, and onions were stored in underground cellars or buried in sand or straw, where they could remain fresh for months. Cabbages were transformed into sauerkraut through fermentation, creating a vitamin-rich food that prevented scurvy during the long months without fresh produce. Medieval peasants understood the principle of layering long before modern outdoor enthusiasts discovered it. Their winter clothing was a masterpiece of practical design, using every available material to trap warm air and block cold winds. The base layer consisted of linen undergarments, which helped wick moisture away from the skin. Over this, peasants wore wool tunics, leggings, and dresses. Wool was prized for its ability to retain warmth even when damp, and every family with sheep would spend the long winter evenings spinning and weaving their own cloth. Outer garments were often made from leather or thick wool, sometimes lined with fur from hunted animals or sheepskin. Cloaks and mantles provided an additional layer of protection, while hoods kept heads and necks warm. Feet were protected by leather boots stuffed with straw for insulation, or by multiple layers of wool wrappings. Perhaps most importantly, no part of an animal was wasted. Fur from rabbits, foxes, and other small game was sewn into clothing linings. Even scraps of cloth were saved and pieced together into quilts and additional garments. The concept of throwing away usable material was completely foreign to people who knew that every bit of warmth could mean the difference between life and death. Medieval peasants understood that survival was not an individual effort, but a community endeavor. Villages developed sophisticated systems of mutual support that helped everyone make it through the harsh winter months. Communal activities served multiple purposes. Families would gather in the largest homes for storytelling sessions, combining their body heat while sharing oral traditions and knowledge. These gatherings also served as a way to pool resources so families might share preserved foods, tools, or fuel. Work continued even in the depths of winter, but it moved indoors and became communal. Women would gather to spin thread, weave cloth, and sew garments. Men would repair tools, craft furniture, and maintain equipment. Children learned essential skills while contributing to the family's survival efforts. Religious communities played a crucial role in winter survival. Monasteries often served as emergency shelters and food distribution centers during the worst periods. Churches became gathering places where people could share warmth and support each other through the darkest months. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of medieval winter survival was the psychological resilience these people displayed. They understood that winter was temporary, and they developed cultural practices and traditions that helped maintain hope and community bonds during the darkest months. Winter festivals and celebrations, many of which survive in modified forms today, served as crucial psychological anchors. These celebrations reminded people that spring would return, that their suffering had meaning, and that they were part of a community that would support them through any hardship. The medieval peasants who survived these brutal winters were not just tough, they were ingenious, cooperative, and remarkably resourceful. Their legacy teaches us that human beings can adapt to almost any challenge when they combine practical knowledge, community support, and an unshakable determination to survive. As we face our own modern challenges, we can learn from these remarkable people who turned ice into opportunity, and who proved that even in the depths of winter, the human spirit can not only survive, but thrive.